I was 17 when I learned that silence can be louder than screaming, and that the cruelest thing we can do to another person isn't violence, it's looking away. Her name was Eleanor Marsh, and for 3 years, our entire neighborhood treated her house like it was cursed. We crossed the street to avoid walking past her fence. We told our children not to retrieve balls that landed in her yard. We whispered about her at block parties, creating stories to fill the gaps of what we didn't understand. And I was part of it. God help me, I was one of the worst. My name is Sarah Chun, and this is the story of how an entire community can be so catastrophically wrong about someone that the weight of it changes you forever. I'm 32 now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about Eleanor and that house at the end of Maple Street. Not a single day. It started the summer after I turned 14, right after the Marsh family moved into the Victorian house with the wraparound porch. Back then, it was beautiful, painted a soft yellow with white trim, flower boxers under every window. Eleanor and her husband, David, had a daughter. Her name was Lily, and she was 6 years old, with dark curls and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. I used to babysit for them occasionally. Lily loved strawberries and would only eat them if you let her dip them in chocolate first. She had this stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons that she carried everywhere. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what came before. You need to know that Eleanor wasn't always the woman we feared. She was kind. She baked lemon bars for new neighbors. She organized the annual street fair. She smiled easily and laughed even easier. And then, one October night, everything changed. I wasn't there when it happened. None of us were. But the ambulance sirens woke up half the neighborhood at 2 in the morning. Red and blue lights painted our bedroom walls, and I remember pressing my face against the window, watching paramedics rush into the Marsh house. My mother came into my room, her face pale, and told me to go back to bed. But I saw them bring out the stretcher. I saw the small form under the white sheet. I saw David Marsh collapse on his front lawn. Lily was gone. Some kind of accident, they said. The details were never made public, and people filled in the silence with speculation. Carbon monoxide. A fall down the stairs. A drowning in the bathtub. The theories multiplied like bacteria in the dark. David moved out within 2 weeks. The divorce papers were filed within a month. And Eleanor stayed in that house, alone, while the neighborhood slowly turned its back on her. I didn't understand it back then, the way people started avoiding her. But I felt it, the way you feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain falls. Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped waving. Mr. Rodriguez, who used to chat with Eleanor over the fence about his tomato plants, suddenly found reasons to garden only when she was inside. My own mother, who had been friends with Eleanor, who had shared recipes and complained about property taxes over coffee, stopped returning her calls. It's complicated, Sarah, my mother said when I asked why we didn't see Eleanor anymore. Sometimes people need space to grieve, but that wasn't what was happening. We weren't giving her space. We were exiling her. The rumors started quietly, the way all poison does. Someone said they heard arguing that night. Someone else mentioned that David had looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks, like something had been wearing him down. Another neighbor claimed they'd seen Eleanor through the window the day before it happened, just standing motionless in Lily's room, staring at nothing. There's something not right about her, I heard Mrs. Patterson tell a group of women at the grocery store. I was in the next aisle over, supposed to be getting cereal, but I stood frozen, listening. A mother knows when something's wrong with another mother. I'm telling you, David knew it too. Why else would he leave so fast? I heard she didn't even cry at the funeral, someone else added. Just stood there like a statue. Who doesn't cry for their own child? I wanted to speak up. I wanted to say that grief looks different for everyone, that Eleanor had lost everything, that we didn't know what happened that night. But I was 14, and the weight of adult certainty is a heavy thing to stand against. So I stayed silent, clutching a box of Cheerios, hating myself. The house started to change after that first year. The yellow paint began to fade and peel. The flower boxers became empty wooden caskets. Weeds claimed the garden where Eleanor used to grow roses. The porch swing hung motionless, no one there to push it into motion. It was like watching something die in slow motion, and we all just stood by and watched. I still walked past it every day on my way to school. Everyone did it was the main route through our neighborhood. But we all did the same thing. We crossed to the other side of the street. We looked down at our phones or straight ahead, anywhere but at that house. And if we happened to see Eleanor, the woman who used to smile and wave, the woman who had been our neighbor, our friend we pretended we didn't, I saw her sometimes, through the windows or sitting on her porch. She looked smaller somehow, like grief had compressed her into something less than she had been. Her hair, which she used to keep carefully styled, now hung limp and gray-streaked. She wore the same sweatshirt for days at a time. And her eyes, God, her eyes had this hollow quality, like someone had scooped out everything vital and left only the shell. But here's what I remember most. What still haunts me. She never stopped trying to connect. Not at first. She'd come out when she saw someone walking by. She'd wave. She'd call out a hello. And we'd all pretend we didn't hear her. We'd walk faster. We'd suddenly become very interested in our phones. We'd do anything except acknowledge her existence. Stay with me, because this is where it gets worse. This is where I became part of something I can never undo. By the time I was 15, avoiding Eleanor's house had become a game among my friends. Stupid, cruel teenage games that I participated in without thinking about what they meant. We dared each other to run past her house at night. We made up stories about what she did in there alone. We called it the Grief House, and competed to see who could come up with the darkest theory about what really happened to Lily. I bet she snapped, my friend Jessica said one night when a group of us were hanging out at the park. Like postpartum depression or something. But years later, my mom said she heard Eleanor was on all kinds of medications, added Marcus. Antipsychotics, antidepressants, the whole pharmacy. I should have stopped them. I should have said something. Instead, I added my own contribution. My mom used to be friends with her. She told me Eleanor had episodes sometimes, where she'd just zone out completely. Like she wasn't even there. It wasn't true. My mother had never said that. But the lie rolled off my tongue so easily, and the shocked faces of my friends, the way they leaned in closer, hungry for more, it felt like power, like belonging. And I was 16 and stupid and cruel in the way only teenagers can be. Where empathy hasn't yet caught up with the ability to cause pain. You're still listening to this, aren't you? I sometimes imagine Eleanor asking if she could hear these confessions. You're still here, trying to understand how people can be this way. I wish I had an answer that made sense. I wish I could explain it away as youth or ignorance. But the truth is simpler and more terrible. It was easier to make her a monster than to face the randomness of tragedy. It was easier to believe she was somehow responsible than to accept that terrible things happen to good people for no reason at all. The house became a landmark of avoidance in our community. Take a left after the Marsh house, but don't look at it, people would say when giving directions. Birthday party invitations would include notes. We know it's past that house on Maple Street, just keep the kids on the other side. The annual Halloween block party route was changed specifically to avoid her street. She stopped coming outside after a while. Months would go by, and I wouldn't see her at all. Grocery deliveries appeared on her porch. Her mail piled up in her box until the postal workers started leaving it in bags on her steps. The yard became a jungle. The house looked like something from a Gothic novel, all shadows and decay. And we all told ourselves we were doing the right thing. Giving her privacy. Respecting her grief. Not intruding on her pain. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that we had made her invisible while she was still alive. We had turned her into a ghost, haunting her own home. And I was so caught up in my own teenage life, school friends, college applications, first boyfriends, that I barely thought about her at all. She became scenery, like a dead tree or an abandoned building. Something you notice just enough to avoid, then forget about completely. I moved away for college when I was 18. Boston, far enough that I didn't have to come home except for holidays. I told myself I was starting fresh, becoming someone new. I didn't think about Eleanor Marsh for months at a time. When I did think about her, it was abstractly, the way you might recall a sad story you heard once, but that doesn't really touch you. 4 years passed. I graduated, got a job in marketing, started dating someone. Life moved forward the way it does when you're young and convinced that you have all the time in the world to become a better person later. I'd visit home occasionally, and I'd see the house more deteriorated each time, and I'd feel a small pang of something, guilt, maybe, or just discomfort, and then I'd push it aside. But then, in March of my senior year of college, something happened that I couldn't push aside. I was home for spring break, sitting in my childhood bedroom, mindlessly scrolling through social media, when I saw a post in our neighborhood Facebook group. Mrs. Patterson had written it. "Has anyone seen Eleanor Marsh lately? Her newspapers have been piling up for over a week. Should we call someone?" The comments were a mix of concern and the same old cruelty. Why would she even get newspapers? Who reads physical newspapers anymore? Maybe she finally left. Good riddance. We should probably do a wellness check. I mean, we can't just let her die in there. She's been dead to this neighborhood for years anyway. That last comment made me feel physically ill. I closed my laptop and looked out my window. From my room, I could just see the peak of Eleanor's roof over the trees. I hadn't walked past her house since I'd been home. I'd been taking the long route everywhere, same as always, same as everyone. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was 4 years of distance giving me perspective. Maybe it was the callousness of those Facebook comments. Maybe I was just finally old enough to feel the full weight of what we'd done. But I stood up, pulled on my jacket, and walked downstairs. "Where are you going?" my mother asked from the kitchen. "To check on Eleanor," I said. My mother's face went pale. "Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. If something's wrong, we should call the police, or we should have called someone 3 years ago," I said, and walked out before she could respond. It was late afternoon, the sun already starting to sink toward the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. I walked down Maple Street for the first time in years without crossing to the other side. The closer I got to Eleanor's house, the harder my heart pounded. What would I find? What if she really was dead in there? What if I was too late? The house looked worse up close than it did from a distance. The porch sagged. Several windows were cracked. The paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing gray wood underneath. The mailbox overflowed with junk mail and newspapers, just like Mrs. Patterson had said. The entire property felt abandoned, like the house itself had given up. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a long moment, trying to gather courage. Part of me wanted to turn around, to tell myself this wasn't my responsibility, that I had tried and that was enough. But then I remembered Lily, the way she used to show me her drawings and ask me to guess what they were. I remembered Eleanor bringing over soup when my mother had the flu. I remembered that these were people who had lived and loved and laughed before tragedy found them. I climbed the steps. The wood creaked under my feet, threatening to give way. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What would I even say? "Hi, I'm one of the people who's been treating you like a pariah for years. Just wanted to make sure you're not dead." Before I could decide, the door opened. Eleanor stood in the doorway, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. She'd aged 20 years in the 5 since I'd last seen her up close. Her hair was completely gray now, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore faded pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt with stains on it. She was thin, too thin, her collarbones protruding sharply. But her eyes, those eyes that I'd remembered as hollow, they were clear, alert, and looking at me with something like surprise. "Sarah Chun," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, like she didn't use it much. "I remember you. You used to babysit Lily." The way she said her daughter's name, so gently. Like it was something precious that might break if spoken too loudly. It nearly undid me right there. "Hi, Mrs. Marsh," I managed. We. "The neighbors notice your newspapers piling up. I wanted to make sure you were okay." She looked past me, scanning the empty street, then back at me with a sad smile. "Just you, though. You're the only one who came." The accusation in those words, gentle as they were, cut deep. "I'm sorry," I said, "and I meant it for so much more than just that moment. I should have come sooner. We all should have." Eleanor studied me for a long moment, and I felt like she was seeing all the way through me, seeing every cruel thing I'd said, every time I'd crossed the street, every moment I'd chosen comfort over courage. "Would you like to come in?" she asked finally. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to make an excuse, to run back to the safety of my mother's house and never think about this again. But I nodded. Yes, I would. She stepped back, and I entered the house I'd been taught to fear. The inside was not what I expected. I'd imagined decay, hoarding, the physical manifestation of grief run wild. But the house was clean, sparse even. The furniture was old but well maintained. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches, nothing to indicate who lived there or what their life had been. It was like a hotel room, temporary and impersonal. "I don't have much to offer you," Eleanor said, leading me to the kitchen. "I don't entertain anymore, obviously." She said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. The kitchen was the same, clean but empty of personality. She filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove. "Tea, unless you're in a hurry to leave." "Tea would be nice," I said, sitting at the small table by the window. Through the glass, I could see her overgrown backyard. There was a playset back there, rusty and covered in vines, the swing hanging at an odd angle. Eleanor saw where I was looking. "I keep meaning to take that down," she said, "but I can't seem to do it. It feels like erasing her, more than she's already been erased." "How do you mean?" I asked, though I knew. God, I knew. She sat down across from me, waiting for the water to boil. "You know how people talk about keeping someone's memory alive? That's not what happened here. This neighborhood buried Lily and then buried me right alongside her. Living burial. That's what it's called. Did you know? When you're still alive but treated as if you're dead." I couldn't meet her eyes. "Mrs. Marsh." Eleanor," she interrupted. "You can call me Eleanor. We're both adults now, aren't we? Though you were practically an adult then too. Old enough to know better." The words stung because they were true. "I'm sorry," I said again, knowing how inadequate it was. "We were wrong. I was wrong." "Do you know what the hardest part was?" Eleanor asked, and I realized she'd been waiting years to say these things to someone, anyone. "It wasn't losing Lily. That was the worst thing that's ever happened to me, the worst thing that could happen to anyone. But I could have survived that. I could have found a way to keep living, if I'd had support. If I'd had people. But instead, I became the villain in a story I didn't even know was being told." The kettle whistled, but she didn't move. She just sat there, looking at me with those clear, painful eyes. "What happened that night?" I asked quietly. "You don't have to tell me. But if you want to, I'll listen. Because this is where everything changed. This is where I finally learned the truth that we all could have known if we'd ever bothered to ask." Eleanor stood up slowly, poured the tea, brought 2 mugs to the table. She wrapped her hands around hers like she was trying to absorb its warmth. Then she started talking. "Lily had a genetic condition," she began. "Something so rare that most doctors had never seen a case of it. It's called Dravet syndrome, a severe form of epilepsy that starts in infancy. She'd been having seizures since she was 6 months old. Some were small, barely noticeable. Others were catastrophic. I remembered the Lily I'd known always smiling, always playing, seemingly healthy. I said as much. "We managed it," Eleanor continued. "Medications, strict routines, constant vigilance. David and I took turns staying up at night to watch her. We had monitors in her room, alarms on her bed. We did everything right. Everything the doctors told us to do. And most of the time, she was okay. She was our bright, beautiful girl. But we were always waiting for the next seizure. Always afraid. She took a sip of tea, and I noticed her hands were shaking. That night, she had a seizure in her sleep. A massive one. We'd had a plan for exactly this scenario. We knew what to do. David called 911 while I stayed with her. Made sure she was breathing, tried to keep her safe. But this one was different. It didn't stop. Even after the paramedics arrived, even with all their equipment and knowledge, they couldn't stop it. It's called status epilepticus when a seizure continues for more than 5 minutes. It can cause brain damage, organ failure, death. I felt tears rolling down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I didn't want to interrupt. She died in the ambulance, Eleanor said, her voice flat now, disconnected. David and I followed in our car. We held each other in the hospital parking lot and fell apart. Our daughter was gone, and there was nothing we could have done differently. It was the disease. It was always going to be the disease. But people said I started. People said a lot of things. Eleanor cut me off. They said we were fighting that night. David was panicking because he couldn't find Lily's emergency medication in the chaos. They said I didn't cry at the funeral. I had no tears left. I'd cried so much in the days before that I was physically unable to produce more. They said I had episodes and was on medications. I did, because I was clinically depressed and seeing a therapist. Because I was trying to cope with the constant stress of having a medically fragile child. They said David left because of me. He left because seeing me, seeing this house, seeing anything that reminded him of Lily was too painful. We both needed different things to heal, and we couldn't give them to each other. She finally looked at me directly, and the pain in her face was so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. I could have explained all of this, she said. I could have told people the truth. But I was drowning in grief, and then I was drowning in isolation. And by the time I realized what was happening, I didn't have the energy to fight it. It was easier to just disappear. To become whoever they'd decided I was. The neighborhood wanted a monster to make sense of tragedy. So I became their monster. I was crying openly now, ugly crying. The kind that makes your whole body shake. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. We were so wrong. I was so wrong. Why did you cross the street, Sarah? She asked. And it wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. You were young, yes. But you were kind. I remember you being kind to Lily. What changed? I thought about it, really thought about it. I was scared, I said finally. Not of you. Of what you represented. You were proof that terrible things can happen to good people for no reason. That we're not as in control as we think we are. And I was a teenager who wanted to believe that if I just did everything right, followed all the rules, I'd be safe. You shattered that illusion. So I avoided you because facing you meant facing how random and unfair life can be. Eleanor nodded slowly. At least you're honest. Most people never even thought about it that deeply. They just followed the crowd. Humans are tribal creatures. Once the tribe decides someone is out, it's easier to go along than to stand alone. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our tea. Outside, the sun had fully set, and the kitchen was dim. Eleanor didn't turn on the lights. Why did you stay? I asked. In this house, in this neighborhood, after everything. Where else would I go? She said simply, this is where Lily lived. This is where her room is. I've kept it exactly the way it was. Sometimes I sit in there and I can almost hear her laugh, almost feel her presence. I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't, I interrupted. It doesn't sound crazy at all. Eleanor smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen from her. Would you like to see her room? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked upstairs, the steps creaking under our weight. The hallway was dark, But Eleanor navigated it like she'd done it 1,000 times in the dark, which she probably had. She opened a door at the end of the hall, and light from the street lamp outside spilled into the room. It was a shrine to a little girl's life. The walls were painted pink with white clouds. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. There was a small desk with crayons and coloring books, and on the bed, tucked carefully under the covers, was Mr. Buttons, the stuffed rabbit I remembered. "I change the sheets once a month," Eleanor said quietly. "I dust. I keep it clean. Like she might come home any day." I couldn't speak. The weight of it all, the isolation, the years of silent suffering, it was too much. "I'm telling you all this," Eleanor continued, "because you're the first person who's asked. The first person who's cared enough to knock on my door and actually wait for an answer. And I need you to understand something, Sarah. I need you to carry this knowledge forward. Can you do that?" "Yes," I whispered. "Anything when you see someone who's suffering, someone who's been cast out by the community, someone everyone has decided is too difficult, or too damaged, or too whatever, to deserve kindness, I need you to remember this moment. I need you to remember that they're still a person. That they're still hurting. That your small act of showing up might be the only thing standing between them and complete despair." She turned to me then, and in the dim light, I could see tears on her face too. "I won't lie to you and say it would have fixed everything," she said. "I still would have lost Lily. I still would have been devastated. But if even one person had come to check on me in those first few weeks, had brought me a casserole, or held my hand, or just sat with me in silence, it might have changed everything. It might have saved me from the second death, the one where you lose yourself." We stood in Lily's room for a long time. Two women separated by age and experience, but connected by the understanding of what it means to fail another person. And to be failed. Finally, I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask. "What can I do now? How can I help?" Eleanor shook her head. "You've already helped. You've listened. You've seen me. That's more than anyone's done in 5 years. But I couldn't accept that. There has to be something more." She thought about it. "Tell people the truth. When you hear them making assumptions about others, when you see them participating in the same kind of social exile that happened to me, speak up. Be the person who breaks the cycle. That's what you can do. If you're still listening, if you've stayed with me this far, you need to know that this story doesn't have a neat, happy ending. I wish it did. I wish I could tell you that the neighborhood rallied around Eleanor after that night. That we all apologized and made amends, and she forgave us, and everything went back to normal. But that's not what happened. I did tell people. I started with my mother, who cried and admitted she'd known the truth about Lily's condition all along, but had been too afraid to defend Eleanor when the rumors started. "I thought it would blow over," she said. "I thought people would eventually move on. I told my old friends, the ones I'd made up stories with, the ones who had participated in the cruelty of our teenage years. Some of them felt guilty. Others got defensive, insisting they'd just been kids, that it wasn't their fault. A few even got angry with me for bringing it up, like I was accusing them of something. I made a post in the neighborhood Facebook group, explaining what I'd learned. The response was mixed. Some people were horrified and ashamed. Others doubled down, insisting there must be more to the story, that I was being naive, that Eleanor must have manipulated me somehow, because it's hard for people to admit they've been wrong. Especially when they've been wrong for so long. Mrs. Patterson deleted my post and removed me from the group. But some things did change. A few neighbors, not many, but a few reached out to Eleanor. They apologized. They offered help. Mrs. Rodriguez, the man with the tomato plants, started leaving fresh vegetables on her porch. A younger couple who'd just moved to the street and didn't know the history invited her to a barbecue. Eleanor didn't go, but she sent them a thank you note. I spent the rest of that spring break visiting her every day. We didn't always talk about heavy things. Sometimes we just watched TV together. Sometimes she showed me photos of Lily and told me stories I'd never heard. Sometimes we sat in comfortable silence, and that was enough. When I went back to college, we stayed in touch. I called her once a week. I visited during summer break. I became, in a way, her connection to the world beyond that house. I also started volunteering with a grief support group. I met other parents who had lost children, other people who'd been isolated by their trauma. I learned that Eleanor's story wasn't unique. There are thousands of people suffering in silence, made invisible by our discomfort with pain. Here's what I learned from all of this. What I need you to understand. Avoidance feels like neutrality, but it's not. When you cross the street to avoid someone who's suffering, you're not staying out of it, you're participating in their exile. When you stay silent while others spread rumors, you're not being diplomatic, you're choosing a side. And when you decide someone is too damaged or too difficult to deserve your compassion, you're not protecting yourself, you're killing something essential in both of you. Eleanor taught me that grief isn't something to be fixed or feared. It's something to be witnessed. And witnessing requires courage, the courage to sit with discomfort, to not look away, to accept that you can't make it better, but you can make it less lonely. I graduated college that May. I got a job back in Boston, far from the neighborhood where I grew up. I thought about moving back home to be closer to Eleanor, but she told me not to. You have your whole life ahead of you, she said during one of our phone calls. Don't anchor yourself to my sorrow. Take what you've learned and use it to be better. That's the best thing you can do for me. So I did. I went to therapy to process my own guilt and grief. I worked on becoming the kind of person who speaks up, who reaches out, who doesn't look away. I volunteered at a hospice. I joined a community organization that supported isolated elderly people. I tried, every day, to be the person I wish I'd been when I was 14. Eleanor and I stayed close. She became like a grandmother to me, wise, patient, scarred by life, but not broken by it. She never fully recovered from Lily's death. I don't think you ever recover from something like that. But she did find moments of peace. She started painting, something she'd never done before. Abstract pieces, mostly full of color and movement. She told me it was her way of expressing things she couldn't put into words. She even started going outside again. Not often, and never far, but she'd sit on her porch sometimes, reading or just watching the street. Some neighbors still crossed to the other side, but some would wave, some would stop and chat. It wasn't much, but it was something. 3 years after that night when I first knocked on her door, I got married. My husband, James, was someone I'd met at one of the grief support groups I volunteered with. He'd lost his brother to suicide and understood what it meant to carry difficult knowledge about loss and isolation. Eleanor came to our wedding. She wore a beautiful blue dress and cried during the ceremony. And afterward she told me that she hadn't thought she'd ever feel joy again. But watching me start my life made her feel something close to it. Lily would have loved this, she said, squeezing my hand. She would have loved you. I have a daughter now. Her name is Lily Eleanor James, and she's 2 years old. When I told Eleanor I wanted to name her after her daughter, she cried for an hour straight. Then she held my baby girl and whispered to her stories about the first Lilia, about her laugh and her love of strawberries and her stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons. My daughter will grow up knowing about the girl she's named after. She'll know about the importance of not looking away. She'll know that sometimes the scariest houses on the street are just houses where sad things happen to good people. Eleanor is 72 now. She still lives in that house on Maple Street. The exterior looks better. Some of the neighbors actually came together to help paint it a few years ago, which Eleanor allowed after much convincing. Her garden is blooming again. She has friends, not many, but real ones who check on her and spend time with her. But the damage from those years of isolation can't be completely undone. She still has nightmares. She still struggles with depression. She still has days where she can barely get out of bed, crushed by the weight of everything she's lost and everything that was stolen from her through cruelty disguised as caution. Last month, I took my daughter to visit her. We were sitting in Eleanor's garden, watching little Lily toddle around chasing butterflies, when Eleanor said something that stayed with me. You know what the cruelest part was? She asked. Not that people avoided me. Not even that they made up stories about me. It was that they convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They told themselves they were being respectful, giving me space, not intruding. They turned their cruelty into a virtue in their own minds. And that's how most harm happens in the world, not through obvious malice, but through the lies we tell ourselves to justify our own comfort. She was right, of course. She was right about all of it. I think about that conversation a lot now, especially when I see other people being quietly excluded from communities. The single mother who's always left off the playdate invitations. The elderly man whose house has become a bit messy, and whose neighbors complain instead of offering help. The family dealing with a child's behavioral issues who get subtle suggestions that maybe they should find a different school, a different church, a different neighborhood. We do this all the time. We exile people, and we tell ourselves we're doing it for good reasons. I'm not perfect at interrupting these patterns. Sometimes I still take the path of least resistance. Sometimes I stay quiet when I should speak up. But more often now, I'm the person who knocks on the door, who brings the casserole, who says, I see you, and I'm here. Because of Eleanor, I know that sometimes that's all it takes to save someone from the second death. A few weeks ago, Eleanor called me. She doesn't call often, we usually stick to our weekly video chats, so I knew something was different. I've decided to sell the house, she told me. My heart sank. Eleanor, you don't have to do that. If it's about money, we can. It's not about money, she interrupted gently. It's about letting go. I've spent 18 years in this house, 7 with Lily, 11 without her. I've kept her room exactly the same for all these years, like a museum to someone who isn't coming back. And I realize now that I haven't been honoring her memory. I've been trapped by it. Where will you go? I asked, trying not to cry. There's a senior community about 30 minutes from you, she said. They have art studios and gardens and a book club. It's time for me to actually live again, Sarah. Lily wouldn't want me spending what's left of my life as a ghost in this house. We talked for a long time that night about what it means to move forward without leaving someone behind. About how carrying someone in your heart is different from turning your life into a shrine to their absence. The house sold quickly. A young family bought it, parents and 3 children. Eleanor met with them before the closing, told them about Lily, about what had happened. She wanted them to know the history, to understand that sad things had occurred there, but that it had also been a house full of love. The new family asked if she wanted to take anything from Lily's room. Eleanor took Mr. Button's the stuffed rabbit. Just that. Everything else she left for their children, hoping they would fill those rooms with new joy. I helped her move into her new Plaza Sunny apartment, with a balcony overlooking a garden. She immediately set up an art studio in the 2nd bedroom. The first painting she hung was one she'd done recently. Bright yellows and blues, with small touches of pink. She called it After the Storm. It's not about forgetting, she told me as we stood looking at it. It's about acknowledging that life continues. That there can be color again. That you can honor what was lost while still embracing what remains. This is where I need to tell you about the day I finally understood the full weight of what we'd done to her, not just the avoidance, but the years of it, the relentlessness of it. It was during one of our video calls, about a month after she'd moved. She seemed lighter, happier. She'd joined the art studio and made a friend. A woman named Patricia, who'd also lost a child, years ago, in a car accident. Patricia asked me something interesting yesterday, Eleanor said. She asked how I survived so long without support. And I realized, I'm not sure I did survive. Not the person I was before. That Eleanor Marsh died when Lily did. The woman you met when you knocked on my door, that wasn't me recovering. That was a completely different person that grief and isolation had created. She paused, and I saw her gathering her thoughts. I used to be funny, Sarah. Did you know that? Before Lily got sick, before everything fell apart, I was the person at parties who made everyone laugh. I loved hosting dinners. I loved meeting new people. I was vibrant and social and confident. And that person is just gone. She doesn't exist anymore. The isolation didn't just hurt me. It killed who I was and left someone else in my place. I thought about the Eleanor I'd known when I was young, the one who organized block parties and brought lemon bars to new neighbors. She was right. That person was gone. And while I'd like to believe that grief alone would have changed her, I know the truth. It was the combination of loss and loneliness that destroyed the person she'd been. "I'm sorry," I said, "for what must have been the 1,000th time. I'm so sorry we did that to you." "I know you are," she said, "and I forgave you a long time ago. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. I need you to carry this forward. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I forgive everyone who turned their backs on me, but that doesn't give me back the years I lost. It doesn't resurrect the person I used to be. Some damage is permanent, even when it's forgiven." That conversation changed something fundamental in how I understood accountability. We want to believe that apologies fix things, that forgiveness heals all wounds. But some wounds don't heal. They scar over, and the scar tissue is tougher but different from what was there before. You learn to live with it, but you're never the same. I think about this now whenever I'm tempted to look away from someone else's pain. I think about the permanent damage that temporary avoidance can cause. The last time I saw Eleanor in person was 2 months ago. I brought little Lily to visit, and we spent the afternoon in her apartment. Eleanor had painted a series of butterflies, different species, different colors, all in flight. She told me butterflies represented transformation, the way something has to completely break down before it can become something new. "That's what happened to me," she said, watching my daughter play with her art supplies on the floor. "I broke down completely. And what emerged wasn't who I was before, but it's someone who understands suffering in a way I never could have otherwise. Someone who has depth that comes only from darkness." She knelt down next to little Lily, who is very seriously coloring a picture of a butterfly. "You know what I think about when I see her?" Eleanor asked me, nodding toward my daughter. "I think about the first Lily, of course. I think about who she might have become. But I also think about how much compassion this little one is going to have because of her name. Because you'll teach her the story. You'll teach her not to look away. And maybe one small piece of good can come from all this pain." My daughter looked up at Eleanor and held out her drawing. "For you," she said in her small voice. Eleanor took it with shaking hands, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. "Thank you, sweet girl. I'll treasure it always." And I knew she would. I knew it would go up on her wall alongside her own paintings, a reminder that some endings make space for new beginnings. Here's what I need you to understand as I come to the end of this story. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty about times you've failed people. It's not the point. The point is that we all have the power to change how this pattern continues. Every single day, you're going to encounter someone who's been cast out by their community. Maybe it's obvious, the homeless person everyone walks past without seeing. Maybe it's subtle, the coworker who stopped getting invited to lunch after their divorce. Maybe it's invisible, the neighbor you've never spoken to because everyone else seems to avoid them. You have a choice in those moments. You can follow the crowd, take the path of least resistance, tell yourself it's not your problem. Or you can be the person who knocks on the door, who asks the questions, who refuses to participate in someone else's exile. It's not easy. It's actually really hard. It means risking social discomfort. It means potentially aligning yourself with someone the group has decided is unacceptable. It means facing difficult truths about suffering and randomness and how little control we actually have over our lives. But it's the only way to break the cycle. Eleanor is doing well now. She's found a community of people who understand loss and don't run from it. She paints almost every day. She video calls me twice a week to see little Lily. She's even started dating someone, a widower named Robert, who lost his wife to cancer and understands what it means to rebuild a life after devastating loss. She'll never be who she was before. The vibrant, funny woman who hosted dinner parties and made everyone laugh. That Eleanor is gone forever. But the woman who emerged from those years of isolation has a kind of strength and wisdom that only comes from surviving the unsurvivable. Last week, she sent me a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter, which is very Eleanor. In it, she wrote something I want to share with you. Dear Sarah, I've been thinking about why I'm telling you all of this, why I've let you carry the burden of my story. It's not to make you feel guilty, though I know it does sometimes. It's because I believe stories have power. They change how we see the world and each other. My story, Lily's story, it matters. Not because it's unique, sadly, it's not, but because it's true. And truth has a way of cutting through all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. If my suffering can prevent someone else's suffering, then maybe it meant something beyond just pain. Maybe that's how we transform tragedy into purpose. With all my love, Eleanor. I framed that letter. It hangs in my office, where I see it every day. It reminds me why this matters. Why speaking up matters. Why not looking away matters. So here we are, at the end of this story. You know the truth now. You know what we did to Eleanor Marsh. You know how wrong we were, how cruel our kindness looked, how much damage our comfort caused. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Because somewhere in your life, there's an Eleanor. Okay, there's someone suffering in isolation. Someone the community has decided is too difficult or too damaged or too whatever to deserve connection. And you have a choice about whether to cross the street or knock on the door. I hope you knock. I hope you ask the questions. I hope you sit with the discomfort of another person's pain without trying to fix it or run from it. I hope you're brave enough to break the cycle. And if you can't do it for them, do it for yourself. Because the person you become when you choose compassion over comfort, that person is someone worth being. The house on Maple Street has a new family now. Their children play in the yard where Lily used to play. They've painted the exterior a cheerful green. They've planted new flowers. Life continues, as it always does, writing new stories over old ones. But if you listen closely, on quiet evenings, when the wind chimes on the porch catch the breeze, you can almost hear the echo of a little girl's laughter. A reminder that the people we lose and the pain we cause don't disappear just because we look away. They stay with us. They change us. And if we're very lucky and very brave, they teach us how to be better. Eleanor taught me that silence can be louder than screaming, and that the cruelest thing we can do to another person isn't violence, it's looking away. I was 17 when I learned that lesson. I'm 32 now, and I'm still learning it. I hope I never stop. I hope you don't either. Because everyone has a story. Everyone has pain. And everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be seen.